it is nearly impossible to predict what the hell is going to happen.
Yes.
And there's a myriad of techniques that they use to do this. But man, the most frustrating part about these techniques is even if you know what they are almost by definition impenetrable. So your knowledge of them does not make it easier to predict what's going to happen, almost by design. So let's start off by talking about mystery plans. We already talked about this in our El Camino episode, our first Better Call Saul episode, and a little bit in our Parasite episode. But just to redefine it briefly, in case you're new to this podcast, the mystery plan technique, like as soon as I say this, you're going to realize they do this like twice every episode.
Every episode. This is their bread and butter technique.
This is their bread and butter technique. Because in a lot of techniques where it involves characters enacting a plan, the way it usually goes is they have like a dramatic meaning. It's like, here's the plan. And then it's like there's like voiceover narration of like what the plan is going to be while they're enacting the plan. Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould and these writers do not do that. Instead, what they do is they just drop you right into the middle.
And media res.
In media res. In fact, that might be how they talk about it, because obviously they don't use mystery plan technique. They would probably call it in medias res. They drop you right in the midst of the character enacting the plan, and what this accomplishes in terms of drama is it has an innate sense of mystery and intrigue, because you're watching it like, what the fuck are they doing? And it's only when the plan is almost completed, it's coming to fruition, that you finally go, oh, this is what they're doing.
Quick break to pay the bills, then back to the podcast.
We at Storytelling Deconstructed are super excited to have Arc Studio as one of our sponsors. And extra points if anyone wants to make a Saul Goodman-esque commercial for visual on this. Send it our way. We will use it.
Wait, what do you mean? Like of us as Saul? Like pitching this...
Yeah, because I realized I was reading, I'm like, this sounds like one of Saul's, like, and most of all, that face. You and your natural charisma, you belong on TV. I'm Saul Goodman. Right?
Yeah. Right now, you should read the whole ad in that voice. Are you frustrated with your screenwriting software? Every episode, we'll just have the ad read be themed off whatever show we're talking about. Everybody listening, when Erik reads this, imagine it in Saul's voice. All right, here we go.
Are you frustrated with the existing screenwriting software options that are designed to be a formatting tool and not much else? Well, screenwriting just got easier. Arc Studio actually understands how screenwriters think. They've created screenwriting software that doesn't distract with an overloaded interface, so you can write without distraction. Say goodbye to archaic, outdated screenwriting software, and hello to advanced storybuilding features, industry-standard automatic formatting, and stress-free collaboration tools that are as easy to use as Google Docs. Arc Studio is used by beginners and professionals alike, such as the team behind the Netflix show Arcane and David Wayne, writer-director of Wet Hot American Summer and Role Models. Join the thousands of screenwriters who have already made the leap. Arc Studio offers a completely free plan, and you can also get $30 off the Pro plan if you visit the link in the show notes or arcstudiopro.com/deconstructed. I repeat, for $30 off, visit arcstudiopro.com/deconstructed.
I have used Arc Studio. It is a genuinely good software. Like, it actually is good. We wouldn't lead you guys astray. So yeah, check out Arc Studio. It helps support the show. All right, back to the content.
But Cody, you noticed something in your analysis of the show, another technique that they shoehorn with the mystery plan technique, which is right at the moment when you understand what the mystery plan technique is, they introduce a snag that could potentially derail the mystery plan.
That's right. Yeah, so it's this, they drop you in, you have no idea what's going on, and then you're slowly catching up, like, oh, here's what's going on, and right at the moment that you figure out I get it now, I see where it's going, there's a complication in the plan. But something goes wrong, and now the character has to scramble to deal with that.
Right, I mean, in this season, the classic example is they're doing this, like, Rube Goldbergian scheme to copy Howard Hamlin's car keys, and you're like, why are they copying the car keys? So, like, the ultimate embodiment of this is when Saul dresses up as Howard Hamlin. He has the keys, he has the cone, he's getting into the car, and finally you see the fruition of this aspect of the mystery plan when he pushes the hooker out of the car in front of Clifford Maine. And it's like, oh, it's just reinforcing this idea to Clifford Maine that Howard Hamlin is a drug addict. But the snag, he gets back, who moves a cone? That's the snag in the mystery plan. And I mean, of course, the way that they maneuver themselves out of the mystery plan is Saul moves the parking sign, but I mean, obviously, like, most people are not aware of the exact position of where they parked their car. So Howard Hamlin just walks back to his car and that's the end of it. I mean, obviously, the most recent version of the mystery plan having a snag is they're in the mystery of the plan to get Howard to seem like he's coked up in this sandpiper meeting. And the snag is, oh, shoot, we made these photos of the judge. Crap, he has a broken arm. That's the snag. So yeah, like, as soon as you see this technique, you realize they do it like not just every episode. They do it like twice every episode. Like Kim, Saul, and Mike use mystery plans all the time. It's like their mode of being.
Yes. This is their bread and butter technique.
And it was in Breaking Bad too, all the time.
Yes.
So now that we've redefined what mystery plan is, let's talk about what makes a good plan. Because I'm sure a lot of you, like us, have seen a lot of movies or read a lot of books where it involves a character enacting a plan and it's not satisfying. Here's how most stories do a plan. They have a character enacting a plan in which the plan hinges on multiple chance elements having the outcome work in their favor. And then, of course, because it's a story, they do, and the way you justify it is, oh, this character is a genius.
Right.
So they could just keep in mind all these moving, uncontrollable variables.
And predict them, yeah, perfectly.
That is very unsatisfying because, like, even if you're a genius, just because of Murphy's Law, like, things are going to go wrong that you're not accounting for, and it's unbelievable. So, like, you can't pass that off as, like, oh, my character's a genius. Because, I mean, first of all, you're probably not good enough of a writer, and by you, I mean anyone. No one is good enough of a writer to, like, write a true genius in a way that's, like, believable. So, to use a random example, just because this has been in my life for a while, the manga and anime Death Note. There are a ton of these types of plans. Because, I mean, it's a cat and mouse game between, like, a guy who gets the Death Note where you write someone's name and they die in a specific manner, and the detective trying to catch them. So it's a cat and mouse game, and they're enacting these various plans to try and one-up each other. So many of the plans, and the ultimately successful plans, hinge on these uncontrollable chance elements. And it's incredible, like, and you read it, and it's just... Like, I say this as a fan of Death Note. This is one of the worst aspects of Death Note. It's unbelievable to the point of, like, really tarnishing a lot of the good that the series does. Another example that came out like 10 years ago was in the James Bond movie Skyfall, where Javier Bardem has this plan to get out of his, like, cell, and it hinges on, like, a train coming at an exact moment to, like, crash through, and it's like, what? Like, come on. So right now we're going to talk about what are some techniques you can use to make believable plans. As a simple groundwork rule for if you have a good plan, you know you have a good plan if it is more believable that the plan would work correctly than if the plan were to fail. One of the best plans that has ever been enacted in a story is Walter White's plan to kill Gus Fring. So what's the first plan? The first plan is, I'm going to put a bomb on his car, and he'll start the car, and he'll die. In analyzing this part of the plan, here's another technique that you can use to make your plans more believable. That first plan does not work. It's Murphy's Law. Something goes wrong. And what goes wrong is actually integral to the plot. Because maybe some of you in the audience are not clear on why Gus did not get in his car at that moment. What happened was, Gus had that confrontation with Jesse where Jesse told him that he was in the hospital looking after Brock because he was poisoned. And Jesse said that with a bite, like implying that Gus poisoned him because that's what Walt told him. And thus, that's why Jesse's not making meth. So then Gus tells him, okay, you can stay with the boy. And he's walking back to his car, and Walt's looking through the binoculars like, oh geez, what's going to happen? Like, he's going to get in his car, my plan's going to work. But then Gus stops. And, like, this is the type of writing that in a writing class, they would give you points off because it's so subtle. Gus just, like, goes to he stops, then he goes to the railing, looks around, and recedes. What was happening in that moment? You only realize this after the fact because Gus did not poison Brock. Walt poisoned Brock. And Gus realizing at that moment that Brock was poisoned, and like Gus had the moment in his brain, Walt's something's wrong here. Something's wrong. So that first plan goes wrong. That is another way you can make your plans believable, by making it part of the plot to have the plan go wrong in some way. You can dramatize that.
Yes. Yeah, that they use that technique every single plan that a character makes in these shows, it does go wrong at some point, and they have to improvise and scramble to fix it.
Yes. But why is the ultimate plan that Walter comes up with great? Because the plan he comes up with is, well, I'm going to attach the bomb to Hector Salamanca's wheelchair, and then I'm going to have Hector pretend to be a rat, and that's going to lure Gus in. Why is that an excellent plan? Because they have already set up that Gus has this really intense personal vendetta against Hector. So it would be less believable for Gus to not want to at least be in the room during the murdering of Hector than to let Tyrus do it. Because Tyrus offers to do it, and that would have had Gus live. And like the plan would have gone sour. But it is more believable that Gus would have wanted to go in and do it himself. That is how you fulfill this principle. And just to add on to this point, another way to reduce your reliance on chance is to broaden your criteria of success. So for instance, Gus doesn't need to kill Hector. He just needs to be in the same room. So if you broaden your criteria for the success of the plan, that also lends itself towards making a more believable plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying that, like, if they're throwing a dart at a target, if the only way the plan succeeds is a very specific thing has to happen, that makes it less believable that very specific thing will happen. But if their plan succeeds when any number of things happens, it's more believable that that's a realistic plan.
Yes. Based on what we know about the relationship between Gus and Hector, it is way less believable that Gus would pass on personally being there to kill Hector.
Yeah.
Another way you can make plans believable is to have the character plan for both outcomes. Mm-hmm. So because every plan hits a snag. And you can do what this show often does, which is have the character scramble, like in the instance of having to retake the pictures of the judge with the broken arm. You can totally do that, and that's believable. But you can also have it embedded in the plan that the person who made the plan plans for both outcomes. It's like, hey, if they go down option A, I'm going to enact this aspect of the plan. If they're going to go down route B, I'm going to have them do this aspect of the plan. Because like one of the great aspects of this most recent mystery plan against Howard is that part of the plan is Howard catching on to the fact that he's being conned. Because he catches on as soon as Clifford Main first confronts him. He realizes immediately. This goes back to your point about characters being intelligent. Because any other writer would have just done an idiot plot where it's just like, gee, like this cocaine. It's like, oh, I don't know what's happening. It's like, no, it's Jimmy. Of course it's Jimmy. Like, duh. But that's part of the plan, because that's why they plant the pictures of the judge. So that way, when he sees the judge walk in the room, it's like, oh, Jimmy fucking bribed the judge. And now.
Yeah. So this is something I talk about a lot as part of writing smart characters. This is something I harp on all the time, is that I hate watching dumb characters on screen. I want every character should be smart. And what makes characters look smart is their ability to model the minds of other characters. So to simulate another character's brain in their own brain. Dumb Jimmy and Kim would expect Howard to be dumb, but they know that Howard is smart. There's a Russian nesting doll thing here that happens where it's like they are modeling Howard's mind, who is modeling them, who is modeling Howard, who is modeling them, who is modeling... So it goes back and forth. It's like not only do they have to imagine Howard, they have to imagine what Howard is going to think when he's imagining them. And right, you can go like multiple layers deep with that. And they have to imagine what Howard's going to think when he's imagining them about how they imagine him. And so it's like you can just keep going in infinite recursion with that. And so all you got to do to make it more complex is just go another layer deep. So it's like the very first layer would be like, we're going to set up this thing and we think he's going to react in the most obvious way. One more layer deep than that is, we set up this thing and we think that he is not going to, that he's going to know that we're expecting him to react in that way. And so he is going to try to not fall into that. So that is now our expectation. And then another layer deep from that is that, oh, he knows that we know that he's not going to react in the first way and he's going to react in the second way. And therefore, he's going to subvert that by reacting in the third way, right? So you can just keep going. And all you got to do is usually 2 or 3 layers deep, and it feels sufficiently complex.
Right. Like the only other techniques that I can think of to make a plan that is dependent on a lot of uncontrollable variables is you need to establish that a low success plan is still more likely to succeed than other potential options. I think that's the only other way that you can make a convoluted plan seem believable. But like, here's something I've never seen, or at least it doesn't happen very often. Because a lot of times when people have someone enacting a plan, it's integral to the plot that the plan succeed. I haven't seen it very often where like a plan goes sour, but the story has to like continue. Like I don't mean like it hits a snag and they have to divert it. I mean the plan goes like
right. It just fails. That's it.
It just fails, and then it's like, hey, what's the story after that? I like that could be interesting to explore.
It would be.
Those are the techniques that I think will make plan scenes more believable.
Sure. And certainly in this show, another thing that helps them work is esoteric, specific knowledge that is being put into place, combined with creative uses or creative angles on that knowledge. So obviously the one in this show, since it's a show about lawyers, is a lot of times the plans hinge on expert knowledge of the law and how the criminal justice system works. So one of the classic ones that we talk about all the time is the plan that Kim and Jimmy implement to get Huel off, to get a plea deal for Huel when he hits the cop, which is that they do this letter writing campaign where Jimmy rides through
Louisiana,
yeah. Has a bunch of random people write fake letters from a fake church congregation that they made up. And what this plan hinges on is it actually doesn't hinge on the law itself. It hinges on deep knowledge of how the legal system works, which is that simply by creating the illusion that this is going to be a boisterous and high-profile case, that just puts stress. There's no legal, like that. There's no reason legally that can't happen. Sure, the whole congregation, they make it seem like the whole congregation is going to show up for the trial and it's going to be a big ruckus. There's no reason that legally can't happen. They just know the personality of this judge and they just know that's going to be a high stress situation for him. He doesn't want to have a high profile case. He doesn't want a bunch of people making noise in his courtroom. He just doesn't want to deal with that. So just not wanting to deal with that is going to make him put pressure on the prosecutor to settle and not take it to trial.
Right. And we learn that about the judge's character because Kim has a couple interactions with him where it's sussed out that that's his personality.
Right. So my point there is just that, yes, it hinges on their knowledge of his personality, but it also just hinges on knowledge of like the fact that like what factors ultimately often lead to like cases not going to trial.
Right.
You have to know that like judges can do that. They can tell the prosecutor, come on, you got to settle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. A more recent example of this is in season 5, the mystery plan Kim and Saul put against Kevin Wachtel to get Mesa Verde
yes.
to not build their call center on Acker's property, which of course Kim wants to renege on the mystery plan, but because like what is the mystery plan? The mystery plan is not that the commercials are going to be so scathing that like that's going to be the end of it. It's the combination of like, yeah, like I'll run them for a little bit. Maybe you'll sue to get them off, but they'll run for a little bit and do a little bit of damage. But ultimately it's just like, okay, like here's this photographer whose picture you used in your logo and stole the intellectual property. And maybe you'll win that case, but you're going to have to put up like curtains on all your signs. And we'll wrap this up in, I don't know, maybe a couple years. And I'm going to keep coming up with stupid shit. And I'm just gonna grind your operation to a halt. And is a call center worth 10 years? I have 10 years. Do you have 10 years? Is it really worth it? Like that takes specific knowledge of the legal system too.
Yes.
That's how a lot of lawyers operate. It's just like, yeah, maybe I can't stop you, but I can grind you to a halt for like a decade.
And that's also a thing that just makes it believable, like that because the character had this esoteric expert knowledge, that's why they were able to get the upper hand. So like it just makes that it's another thing that makes it believable. A way that they don't have to be a genius. Like you don't have to be a genius to be an expert, but it explains it's how they were able to make the predictions and get the upper hand that they did. Okay, let's move on. Right, there's not a lot more to say here, right?
No, yeah, we talked about plans. So now we're moving on to like predictability and how.
So yeah, this show is so hard to predict. It's hard. It's probably the hardest show to predict the outcome I've ever seen, which is amazing because it still feels so satisfying when they finally do get to the thing. And we've identified 2 techniques they use, specific nuts and bolts techniques, in these larger plot structures they're creating. So just to be clear what the differences are between, because I think one of the things that can be difficult sometimes is like to understand how all these concepts that we're putting out like connect to each other. How are they all related? How is this all related? So it's like the mystery plan is a bigger structure. It's like this can take you through an episode. It can take you through a season. And within that, there are beats that comprise that structure, and it can take different turns. And so these are some of the specific ways that those beats can take turns that make it difficult to predict what's going to happen.
The first technique that they use often is because like a lot of the way you make something unpredictable is through subversion. For instance, a lot of the predictions I made in our previous Better Call Saul podcast turned out to be wrong, but they were wrong because they saw through what I was thinking and intentionally diverted from that after making it feel like they were going to do it.
It feels like there's one big technique that they're often using. This is like it's nested within a mystery plan. So it is how the mystery plan plays out. They have a thing that sets up an expectation. We're on a trajectory that sets up an expectation. We're going to be arriving at some critical thing or event. And you expect that to take a certain course. As soon as that expectation is set up, immediately afterwards, they create a pump fake where they create that expectation, and as soon as the expectation is established, they go take it in a completely different direction, and they take a hard right turn, a 90-degree turn, off into somewhere completely different. And that's a surprise. It's a subversion of where you thought it was going to go. They knew that they had created that expectation. They now subverted it by going somewhere completely different. And now that different direction creates a new expectation. She's like, oh, now that this is where they were going. But then what they often end up doing is circling back around through a more circuitous route to actually get back to where your first expectation was, or in the ballpark thereof. So an example of this is Lalo's warpath. One of the big things that we talked about at the end of last episode is they end on this shot of last season. Sorry, end of last season, I mean. The end of last season concludes with this shot on Lalo walking towards the camera with the implication that he's pissed, he's going to go on a warpath of revenge. That's what Erik and I, that's what we were predicting for the first part of this season is, we're going to see this Lalo's warpath. He's going to be, and we figured that Nacho would be caught up in that, and he would kill Nacho or whatever. He would start to get his revenge. They opened this season by tipping their hat to that and showing that, like, okay, it looks like that's still what's going to happen. But right when it could have happened, they suddenly had it. They showed him. They made a moment out of this. They made a point of showing this, that here he goes. He's getting on this truck to go back to America, to the States, to cross the border to get his revenge. And then he has a moment where he decides to do something different. And he turns around in his car and he drives the opposite way. And they have a shot showing him driving away from the border. And it's this big question mark of like, holy shit, where is he going? If he's driving away from the border, what's happening? And of course, they geniusly then had him be absent for multiple episodes, so that there's like just this specter hanging over the season of.
Yeah, there's this simmering tension. Like, where the fuck is Lalo? And Mike and Gus feel this tension, and we feel it with them. It's like his absence is more terrifying than his presence.
Yes. And then, of course, a few episodes later, he shows up in Germany, and there's this whole other little arc of him gathering information of Germany. But of course, eventually he does come back and to America, and with this information that he's gathered, and presumably starts to resume his operations against Gus in America and to try to exact his revenge. The point is that they know that they set up that expectation, and it looks like they're still going to give it to us. I mean, we'll see if that ends up being the case in this particular instance, but it looks like they're still going to give it to us. They just gave it to us via a more circuitous route. It's both satisfying when they get where we thought it was going to go, but it still surprises us that they did in fact go there, even though we predicted it.
And then in this particular instance, they do another subversion where it's like, okay, we're finally going to get the thing he wants. He's going to, because they plant that there's going to be some big confrontation between Gus and Lalo in the drug lab. That's why Gus plants the gun in the lab. And on one of our phone calls, we had a prediction. It's like, they may try to be subversive by ending the Lalo arc early, by having the confrontation happen like the last 25 minutes of this mid-season finale, and that's what it seemed like they were going to do. But then Lalo realizes the phones are tapped, and he has to come up with another plan. So it curves away from our expectation yet again, and he's going off over here, which made Howard's death like twice as devastating.
Yes. So they're constantly doing that. And it sounds like we're just saying, oh, create an expectation and then subvert that expectation, which is like, okay, sure. But I think the key thing that's interesting is how they often come back to that expectation. They go in and out of, so they set up expectations and they go in and out of subverting and fulfilling them so that you can't even reliably predict the subversion. Like, sometimes they do fulfill them. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they fulfill them very quickly. Sometimes they fulfill them with a longer delay than you were expecting when you forgot you were even expecting it via an extremely winding path. It's, and that's part of what makes it so hard to predict. But yet they can always have in their back pocket, they can always, if they need to, because we talked about this before, but like one of the dangers of being too subversive with your plots is they can be extremely unsatisfying because it just feels like it came out of nowhere. So this is a way to balance those two things where it can be satisfying because it was often set up by all the stuff that came before, but it's still unpredictable because it got to where that expectation through so many twists and turns.
Another technique that can be used, Rick and Morty uses this technique all the time, is subversion via immediate fulfillment. Cody talked about this in terms of essentially taking the 3-act structure and compressing it down into the first act, meaning you get to where everyone thinks the story is going to go in the climax of the third act, but do it in the first act, because then that creates like, whoa, I still have 2 acts left to sit through. What could they possibly do after that? And that's one of the more interesting subversion techniques. And they slightly use this technique in regards to Nacho's death. Our prediction was that Lalo was going to be on the warpath to kill Nacho, but obviously in the second episode of this season, they divert Lalo away from that fate, and then they have Nacho be killed in a way that ties up that thread completely. Meaning, because the reason why I predicted that Lalo was going to go on the warpath with Nacho is that Lalo was going to torture Nacho and make him talk and confess that it was Gus. But the writers saw through that and made it so that way Nacho had this drama, like the story that Gus and Mike told him to say in exchange for the safety of his father. Because Nacho's not going to lie because he wants to secure the safety of his father. That's his key character trait, is that he loves his family and he wants to protect his father. Though, man, they still tried to subvert it when in the last moments, they almost did like a Ned Stark thing where right before he's about to say the story, he looks over at Gus like he's like, maybe I don't do what you want and I out you right now. And it's like, God damn it. Because the thing is, I would have believed that too. They set it up so perfectly that they could have done that and I would have believed it too. That's what the show is so great at. They make it almost impossible for them to fail. They set it up so that way almost any outcome could happen and it would be satisfying. I think that's the real genius of the show.
Yeah.
Is like, it could almost go anywhere, but purely by them putting the pieces in a particular order and articulating them in a certain way, it's like, man, like, hey, these 4 things could happen and all of them would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they tied up the Nacho thread completely by having him confess according to the script. He's able to commit suicide, so they can't torture him and make him change his story. They've secured the safety of his father. And Lalo has nothing to complain about now. Because, like, Lalo can't now go and say, like, it was Gus, because Nacho put that to bed for the cartel. So now Lalo, and that's what he's doing right now, he has to now find other means of incriminating Gus in Lalo's assassination attempt.
Right. And it's an example of what you're talking about, because Nacho is such an important, essential character to the show and has been since the beginning, that you could make a sort of you could say that there's a sort of meta expectation here that, like, they're going to save his death till the very end. In much the same way that, like, you don't expect King Joffrey to die in Game of Thrones in episode 2 of the season. It's like, no, they're going to save that as a finale moment. But no, when they do it in the second episode or the third episode, it's like, oh shit. Well, they just used up a huge dramatic thing they had in their pocket, a huge climax they had in their pocket, and they used it up really fast. And so,
yeah, it's a really this is an underutilized technique of subversion. Subversion by just doing the expectation immediately, because then like it's subversion by the opposite. It's subversion by doing the obvious, and then you're looking at your watch like there's still 40 minutes left.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And we're using the term Aristea. We keep saying Nacho's Aristea. We should define Aristea really quick, because it's a great term, just a little concept. It's obviously, it comes from Aristotle, and it's a Homerian term. And the idea is that it's a scene in which a character reaches their highest culmination and really gets to, like, show off the core of who makes them who they are in grandest, most archetypal fashion, and it often ends with their death. So the classic place where this is derived from is the Iliad, where there are multiple characters who, Hector's Aristea is when he fights with Achilles and he gets to show his bravery in being willing to, he knows he's going to die in that battle, and yet he goes into it anyway. And that shows the height of not only his fighting ability, but his honor and his bravery. And, et cetera. There are multiple of these. Ajax, but he dies at the end of the scene, of course. The whole Iliad is just a series of Aristeas. And this is a classic. This is a great example of an Aristea, where Nacho's essence as a character is brought to its highest height in that scene. It would have been way less satisfying in that light if he had been, like, for example, tortured to death. He really gets to shine in that last moment. It's kind of an example of a lot of the techniques that we're talking about all coming together.
Were there any other techniques in terms of, like, why this show is so difficult to predict?
So yeah, I don't think so. So if I just had to sum all of that up, because we've been kind of meandering a little bit, if I just sum all that up, I'd say there's multiple techniques at play here that make it really difficult to predict. The first one is they don't explain what's happening a lot. We call this the mystery plan technique. Then, as soon as you finally figure out what's going on, now you didn't have an expectation before because you didn't understand what you were seeing, which creates its own curiosity and mystery. But now that you understand what you're seeing, now you have an expectation. As soon as you have that expectation, they subvert it. There's a complication in the plan. Something goes wrong. And so the plan goes sideways, and now something new is happening, and that creates a new set of expectations. And they can come, and now as there's constantly these twists and turns that are happening, every time there's a twist or a turn, and the plot is now going in a new direction, it's setting up a new set of expectations of where that could go. Oh, everything that's happened so far could lead towards this. And this is how they create this feeling that you're talking about of there's like 4 different things that could happen and they would all be satisfying. Because this plot has gone in 4 different directions. And that we have 4 different expectations that have been set up at various times at one time or another. So at any time, they could circle back to complete one of those parentheses or complete one of those threads to fulfill one of those expectations that has been set up, and it would feel satisfying. So the point being that so if I could sum all this up and articulate it in one sentence, it would be establish not just one expectation, but multiple expectations. Because then you get to take your pick of which ones you want to retroactively call red herrings and which ones you actually want to fulfill.
Right. And perhaps the way you choose the outcome that you want is by using the dream image technique.
Yes.
Which is like, which of these outcomes will have the most mythological resonance and lead me to this powerful image that has the highest level of catharsis?
Yes.
Awesome. Predictions? Awesome.
All of that said, we are going to try to synthesize. We're going to put our money where our mouth is. We are going to try to synthesize everything we have said so far, try to put it into practice and see if we can do the impossible and make some predictions about what's coming up at the very end of the show.
Right. Because I'm so frustrated that it's almost like they listen to our episode and it's like, oh, these are your predictions. We're going to pretend like we're going to do them and then not do them. So I think Jimmy and Kim are going to conspire to make it seem like he overdosed on cocaine.
Oh, that's interesting.
To kind of put a button on this. Because then Cliff Davis is like going to come on. It's like, oh yeah, he had a drug problem. And that's going to seemingly close the book. I think they introduced Howard's wife because she's not going to buy it. And she's going to secretly, because I know they did the objective correlative where they had the coffee show the declining nature of the relationship, where he puts a lot of effort into making this beautiful latte for her, and she just blithely pours it into some take-to-work jug. So obviously their marriage in shambles. It's either going to reveal that she actually cares that he's dead, or she's going to very coldly, just as a matter of curiosity or to settle something, go down the trail on her own. And then maybe her narrative is going to intersect with the DA's narrative. And that's going to cause problems. So Jimmy and Kim are going to think they put it to bed by making up this fake, he overdosed on cocaine, but it's going to come back to bite them in episode 3 or 4 of the remaining 6 episodes.
That's a good prediction. Yeah, so they have to deal with the fallout from Howard's death legally, and that they have to not get saddled with being murderers or accessories to murder or whatever implicated legally. They have to deal with it socially in terms of people finding out and experiencing social consequences, not just with the legal community but the cartel. And they have to deal with it emotionally. How is that going to impact their emotions and what that means for how they interpret their journey so far?
Yes, and I think you brought up this prediction on one of our phone calls. Jimmy is going to, in a sense, hold Howard's death as Kim's fault because she knew that Lala was alive.
Yeah, I said one possibility is that Jimmy doesn't forgive Kim for that because she knew that Lala was alive and she didn't tell him. And if she had told him, theoretically, maybe this situation could have been avoided. Now, another possibility of how they interpret Howard's death is one of them, it seems like it would have to be Kim, interprets it as, dear God, we've gone too far.
Yes.
So, feels ultra guilty about it. So it's not just avoiding the external consequences, but feeling internally that this is, because obviously the name of one of the episodes last season, and they set this theme up explicitly, is Bad Choice Road. They've been leapfrogging each other down this bad choice road towards becoming worse and worse people. And this might be Kim's breaking point, where she goes, dear God, why have I been with this guy and allowed him to allowed us both to become increasingly corrupted and go towards this dark path. And this might be the point where she might have a come to Jesus moment and go, I got to get out of here and and go back towards the light. Well, now what they've set up as the core of Kim's character is that she always takes responsibility for herself. So she won't blame Jimmy. That seems like it'd be outside of her character. She won't blame Jimmy for corrupting her. She's always, you don't feed me, I feed me. You don't save me, I save me. She takes responsibility for her destiny. So she will take responsibility for where she got, for being here. But it may be that she's just I can't be a part of this anymore.
And then obviously they're going to have some melding in with the beginning of Breaking Bad.
Yes. Because
we already know that Walter and Jesse are in it. That's been confirmed. Those actors have confirmed that.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's going to be some point where it smoothly melds, where they're going to kidnap Saul and take him to the desert, and that's going to dovetail into Breaking Bad. Or something to that effect. Do you think they're going to have an episode where they simultaneously have, where they show things during Breaking Bad from Saul's perspective? Because I'm almost wondering, they might not have enough time to do that. They have 6 episodes.
I'm increasingly thinking that it's going to be yes, but very short. So for a second, I thought it was going to be long, and it was going to be 6 episodes of this season were going to be concurrent with Breaking Bad. And now I'm thinking it'll be 1 episode, the entire Breaking Bad plot in 1 episode. And it'll be, we'll see 1 moment or 1 scene with,
right.
That'll just be the pivot point.
Because one prediction that I made that seems like it's going to come true is every season started with a flash forward to Gene Takovic, Saul's newest identity as the manager of a Cinnabon in Omaha. And those fuckers at the beginning of the season, it seemed like they were going to do it because it was in black and white, but instead, then they introduced the color ties, and instead it was the downfall of Saul's manor, his estate. So I do think they're going to have either one full episode at the end or like half of an episode at the end where it's only the flash forward.
So let me sum up our prediction for the entire show. They have to deal with the fallout of Howard's death, both emotionally and legally. They're able to cover it up temporarily, but the DA tracking it down, it leads back to Kim. She is facing the legal consequences of that. She's also facing the emotional consequences of like, dear God, what have I done? And I think it probably actually will end on decent terms between them. Like, it's not going to be like, I hate you. It's going to be like, I love you, but we gotta do for now.
We will fight. Let's live to fight another day. We'll rendezvous when this is all over.
Yes. And she will go into hiding. And here's the little clue I think that they've set up. This is really small, but they establish early on that Kim is from Nebraska, a small town in Nebraska. And there's an open question of, well, Gene Takovic is in Omaha. Why did he choose Omaha, Nebraska as his location? He's going to try to reunite with Kim. So throughout all the Breaking Bad timeline, she is in hiding back in her hometown. She went back to Nebraska to go back to her old life. And maybe not using the back of her pair mind, because that would obviously be creating a new identity. She goes back to her old life in Nebraska and to hunker down and play it safe. And all the Gene Takovic stuff, one of the little plot thread that's been set up there is he's got these diamonds. And we don't know what he's going to do with the diamonds. I think what it's going to be, but he's on the run from the cops. I think what it'll be is it's going to be that little thing has to be resolved of like, how is it going to be resolved with him running from the cops? I think it's probably going to be something like he just accepts who he is. He's Slippin' Jimmy. He's always going to be sort of in this gray area, legal, moral gray area. And he shows up and he finds Kim. That's where he's going in this taxi ride. He finds Kim wherever she's hiding out. And it's this sort of he's going to use the diamonds, and they're fake diamonds. And it's this sort of proposition of like, let's run one more scheme together. And it's going to be like, which is kind of dark because it like represents going back to their old life and their old ways. But it's like, yeah, but this is all we know. And it's kind of romantic. It's like, let's ride off into the sunset as Bonnie and Clyde. And that might be a hard sell for Kim because she's still, grappling with, she still feels guilty about what happened. And I'm guessing she's been living a quiet life. We might even get a whole Kim episode, like just an entire episode dedicated to showing Kim's life, her version of Gene Takovic and where she's been. And I'm guessing that she will also, I don't think she's going to go on to like a new glorious life. I think her new life will be equally as boring and small scale as Gene, working in a Cinnabon. And we're going to see this itch in both of them to go back to the glory of the fun and of the life that they had together, even though she feels incredibly guilty. And so that's going to be the obstacle that she has to overcome. And he's going to be, come on, let's go back to this. And there may be hurdles that she has to, like there may be an arc there. There may be a few episodes where she has to get over that guilt, and maybe by addressing it somehow or atoning for it somehow. Because her conscience has always been the flip side of her willingness to do schemes with Jimmy, doing pro bono cases, et cetera, to like make up for that. So maybe it's actually framed as a good thing. Maybe the scam they pull is somehow to like benefit Howard's estate or like, do something good or for a charity. Maybe that's the framing of it, which makes it okay in her eyes. But I think Jimmy's going to pull her back in, and they're going to, and here's the prediction. I think when they're reunited, it's going to go back to color. Kind of like the Wizard of Oz, that the whole black and white represents the boringness of their life apart and of their lives trying to play it straight and live by, the rules. And so when they come back together, they enable each other, and the fun and joy of enabling each other to go on these crazy adventures and have these crazy schemes. That's the full Technicolor life. And there's a sort of, I'm guessing it ends on a sort of Thelma and Louise moment. of kind of driving off the cliff, knowing that they're going to their doom in some way. Like, they won't get away with this forever. It's going to be bad in some way, either for them or for other people. But they're kind of okay with it because it's like, this is who we are. In some way, this is us being our most actualized selves, living our most actualized lives.
Right. Well, and there's an urgency because that guy identified Gene Takovic as Saul. And that's why he's on the phone call with the vacuum cleaner guy and says, I'll do it myself. And so, yeah, like if they were to do that, it would probably be to somehow, like, I don't know if they're going to kill the guy, but
sure,
they're going to do something to make this guy like they're going to do it like what Jimmy did to the thugs with the piñatas, like do something to like get their silence.
Yeah, could just be as simple as like just bribing him with the fake diamonds. It's just like they're fake, or maybe they're not fake, but whatever, like something just as simple as that. Like they'll do a little scheme which will resolve that imminent threat, and it will be the most important. Like, because to me, the important thing is not resolving that little scare of potentially being made. Like, there's a million ways you could resolve that. It's like, whatever, that's not important. It's like one little thing. The important thing is the emotional resolution of Jimmy and Kim get reunited. And there's this open question of like, because the question of the whole show for Jimmy's character has been, he is tempted to be Slippin' Jimmy, which is a bad person who hurts the people around him. And he has tried to curtail his true nature for the people around him. He has tried to perform as an upstanding guy for the people around him. He tried to perform being an upstanding citizen and good lawyer for Chuck to make his brother happy. Then he tried to perform being a good person for Kim to make her happy. But turns out she didn't need him to be that, and that's where we are now, where they went down that dark road. And so...
yeah, she's turned on by Slippin'
That's right.
Jimmy.
She is actively attracted to that aspect of him. And so the open question is going to be like, is them going down that road going to hurt her in the same way and lead to a terrible end, just like it did for Chuck? But the complication in that, so one way that could lead is like, oh, well, the ultimate conclusion of that is he doesn't let that happen. He quote unquote protects her or does something to prevent him from hurting Kim. And that's the conclusion of that. It's like, no, he didn't see that bad road to its conclusion, which is Kim having a terrible outcome the same way Chuck did. But the complication to that is that Kim is too strong of a character to not be an active, responsible agent who takes responsibility for her own destiny. So that's what leads me to the prediction of like, they're going to drive off the cliff, metaphorically.
The other way that they could resolve the Gene Takovic timeline, which we talked about as a prediction in our first Better Call Saul episode, is having Lalo come back in the Gene Takovic timeline and somehow have that be a dangling thread. Though you brought up something on one of our phone calls that's kind of a seeming contradiction that is interesting to explore in terms of Lalo fate. You know what I'm talking about?
You mean where I predicted how he was going to die in the lab?
Yeah. It's a specific, so here's the contradiction. The contradiction is, at the beginning of Breaking Bad, Saul has to think Lalo is alive.
Oh, right.
But then in season 4 of Breaking Bad, Gus tells Hector that all the Salamancas except for him are dead.
Right.
Which so what that means is that Saul has to think that Lalo is alive, but Gus has to think that he's dead.
So there's two ways you could resolve that, right? You could have him be actually alive and Jimmy knows the truth, or he's actually dead and Gus knows the truth, because they're in contradiction to each other. So Gus either thinks that he's dead and it's resolved and he's not, in which case he could come back in the Gene Takovic timeline and he gets resolved with Jimmy, or he could actually be dead because, in all likelihood, Gus kills him. But, but then Gene has to learn later, probably, to put a button on that plot to end that one. He has to then probably learn that Lalo has been dead all this time. So they have to reconcile their knowledge.
Exactly. Because, and the way they would do the former is they send Lalo away, like he gets put in prison. He gets Cape Fear.
Right.
Right? They send him to Antarctica or whatever it is. And
yeah, he gets locked away in the Shadow Realm, Ganondorf style or whatever.
It's just like, when I get out of here, you're dead, Jimmy.
Right.
You're dead.
Right. And then he comes back in the Gene Takovic timeline.
And somehow Gus thinks that he's dead in that instance. Where whatever happened, like they spin a story to Gus that he's dead. And because he's gone so long, Gus believes it.
Right. Or by the way, the way they could do that is via Donal audio. Because remember, they showed Lalo making that videotape explaining to Donal audio what was happening. And so it could be that like Donal audio helps Lalo disappear and makes Gus think he's dead, which would retcon Breaking Bad a little bit, which would show that like, because in Breaking Bad, we're led to believe that Gus is Donal audio's golden boy and he loves him, or not loves him, but he, and that would retcon it and be like, it would add another layer of complication, which is that like, he knows that Gus tried to kill Lalo, but pretends like he doesn't know because Gus is making so much money and he has a longer term plan to ultimately kill Gus, but Gus kills him first.
Yes. So say your specific prediction for Lalo's death.
So that's a possibility, but right now that's a possibility and that could happen, in which case Lalo's ultimately gets dealt with permanently in the Gene Takovic timeline. That's a possibility, but that's my second choice. My number one prediction right now is that Gus does in fact kill Lalo. All of Better Call Saul, because there's two basically halves of Better Call Saul. There's Jimmy and Kim in the legal, and Chuck and Howard in the legal world, and there's the cartel world with Gus and Mike and Nacho and Lalo. The whole cartel half of the show has been building the lab. That has been the centerpiece of the whole thing. So to bring it back to that, here's my prediction. Lalo has a final confrontation with Gus in the lab. Gus gets the upper hand, kills him, incapacitates him, and buries him alive with the Bobcat, with the little earth mover, in the lab, with the the creepy implication that like his body is under that lab throughout the entire Breaking Bad plot, which kind of just adds this creepy overtone to all the scenes in that room.
And to add something to your prediction, I think that if they do bury him alive, Gus will do a thing where it's like, I want to hear you scream, but instead he just has that calm smirk that he always has on, and he doesn't give Gus the satisfaction in the same way that Hector doesn't give Gus the satisfaction of looking at him.
Right. Yes.
Because Gus, like Lalo is a lot like Ted Bundy, where like one minute he's like charming and suave, and the next minute he's a murderous psychopath and he can turn on a dime. Which is why he's so terrifying, because I totally believe that he would have turned on Werner Ziegler's widow in an instant if he felt it was necessary, even though they had bonded and it was really charming.
Right.
So that's my proof as to why he would be so like calm in the face of death. Did you ever read the comic book Sin City or watch the movie? Like there's a similar thing where there's like this like cannibal like killer, and like the guy's like, I want to hear you. He like feeds him to his own dogs. He's like, I want to hear you scream, and he just sits there and just lets his own dogs eat him. It's a very similar thing.
Sure, absolutely. But then we still have to deal then with Jimmy's thinking that Lalo is alive. So Gus knows that he's dead because he killed him. But then Jimmy still thinks that he's alive, and that would have to be dealt with in the Gene Takovic timeline. And there's many ways that you could do that, but I'm guessing what I'm guessing they'll do, and the easiest way out of that is simply that my guess is that they never believe that he's dead. Jimmy and Kim never learn that Lalo is truly dead, and they choose to be who they are, to let their freak flag fly with the knowledge or the belief that it might lead to Lalo finding them and killing them. And they don't care. And they're like, okay, it's part of what they embrace. Their ultimate conclusion is they embrace who they are, they live as they are, and they're okay with being caught, they're okay with being made, they're okay with ultimately knowing that eventually, where this will lead, is they will be driving off a cliff, Thelma and Louise style, and they're okay with that. I'm guessing it will be wrapped into that feeling.
Sure. Or it could always be the archetypal story beat where it's like, you get your gun and wait on the porch. It's like, all right, you bastard, where are you? And then they just like sit there in silence, and that's the end of the show. It's just like waiting for Lalo permanently.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, I think that's the same feeling that I'm talking about. It's going to be baked in, I think, that final feeling. It's like, we are going to do this last scam in the full light of day, knowing that it will attract the attention of so-and-so, the police, of Lalo, of all these people who are after us. And ultimately, one of them will catch up with us. If it's not Lalo, it'll be the cops. If it's not the cops, it'll be the cartel. If it's somebody will catch up with us, and that's fine.
You had another prediction about Kim regarding the theme of kayfabe.
Yeah, so this is I think this is a lesser possibility. This is not one of my number one predictions, but it is there. One thing that occurred to me is that it might be that Kim has actually been in character this whole time. And that occurred to me because riffing off of this theme that you've put forward of kayfabe, these characters constantly pretending they're who they're not, it would be an interesting twist that the person who we thought was playing the character this whole time, Jimmy, part of the reveal, we thought he was the corrupt one, and then there was this twist at the end of last season where actually Kim is kind of leading him, and she's actually the more corrupt one, and the culmination of that would be that actually she's been the one who's really been playing the character this whole time, that Kim Wexler is an alias, and there's a really small, there's not a lot that sets that up. One really small thing, though, is that when they get married in that scene, the judge, when he reads their names, he just offhandedly goes, Kim Wexler. Oh, interesting. No middle name. And just moves past that.
When the other story point that could potentially reflect that is the flashback in this most recent season to her childhood when she and her mom are essentially being Slip and Jimmy.
Sure.
Where they pretend like, I mean, she really did shoplift so that way she could get caught, but that was really just a ruse so the mom could steal the earrings.
Right, sure. So her mom does call her Kimmy, but she could have a different last name.
Right.
And so, yeah, it could be that she created this new identity to try to escape that dark past, to try to start afresh with and make her way up in the upstanding, high class legal community of Albuquerque. And she got kind of pulled back into it. And that could help kind of set up how she goes back. So it's like she resumes her old alias, her old life, and goes back to Nebraska and back to Omaha. So that would kind of be, one variation of that prediction.
Yes. But like we said, the techniques that these writers use make the show inherently impossible to predict, but this is our best shot, guys, so we'll see if we're right this time.
Yeah, if we get even a handful of these near the mark, I think we deserve some points.
Yeah, well, I'll consider it a victory. Well,
all right. Well, that concludes our third Better Call Saul episode. We have six more episodes incoming. We'll see if everything we said holds true through those 6 episodes. But when it does, we expect eternal glory.
Yes. And as always, we'll be here to talk about it.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.